Wednesday and we are masked, but the whole idea of this is to get unmasked. Hi, I'm Kanan Chandran, the publisher of stormasia.com, and this is the WED WEB CHAT, where we talk to people about issues that are currently going on now. Everybody's game to travel, everybody wants to head out there, and what we've done for today's session is we've gathered a few people who have recently been on the road and some are away. The whole idea is to try and understand what's going on out there as you travel. Now, travel, it's supposed to free your mind, it's supposed to let you explore the world, and we used to enjoy just sort of jetting off on a long weekend or extended holidays. There were so many rich options to choose from, right, in this area. It was a release valve from the demands of this small, pushy island. Now, after close to 2 years of being stuck at home, being twisted in so many directions by the COVID-19 virus, you'd think the island-strapped folks in Singapore would want to break free. But a survey by Milieu Insight shows that 76% are reluctant to travel for fear of catching the COVID overseas and maybe being trapped there in some hotel. And then there are the added hassles of the additional costs and procedures to contend with. Now, the PCR tests are something that you have to do. And according to Skytrax, that did a survey of the costs of these tests, they range from US $8 in Mumbai to $400 in Kansai. And the ART test, the antigen rapid tests, they range from $2 in Mumbai to $214 in Helsinki. So Mumbai is the place to go if you're cost conscious, I guess. Neither is foolproof, and the ART tests are cheaper and the results are faster. So I was just wondering, should airlines push for a cheaper and more efficient standard, or are there other factors at play here? Now, with the VTLs, the Vaccinated Travel Lane scheme opening up to more countries, and with increased quotas, I think it'll be 10,000 travelers daily, Singapore Airlines has reported 160,000 bookings for these flights, and airline capacity at 37% of pre-COVID-19 levels. And they've activated 92% of the pilots and 86% of cabin crew, at least flying once a month. So things are looking up. Now, what do our jet-setting panelists have to say about travel today? So we have Gerald Ang is a co-founder and CEO of consumer research and analytics company Milieu Insight, which offers a suite of agile research solutions that help organizations make better decisions as they navigate a rapidly changing consumer landscape. He is currently in Hua Hin. Welcome, Gerald. Thanks for taking the time away from your family to be in this session.
Thanks for having me. My pleasure.
We've got Kush Chopra, a well-known face of commentary on Singapore politics and policy. He's a non-practicing lawyer who has a wealth of insight on what's really going on in Singapore. He's a frequent traveler and has recently returned from the Maldives. Hi, Kush. Good to have you here.
Hello, Kanan. It's a great pleasure to be here. Thank you.
We have Amber Mizarak, who has been living in Asia for 12 years and has taken any opportunity to travel. From snowboarding in Kashmir to scuba diving in Indonesia and exploring cliff churches in Ethiopia, she obviously loves to travel. So this 18 months or so must have been sheer torture. The Pennsylvania farm girl finally managed to break free from her desk-bound job in the US Embassy and went home to catch up with family and friends and has returned. Welcome back, Amber, and welcome to this discussion.
Thanks, Kanan. Thanks for having me.
And we have Captain Stephen Koo, a 45-year veteran of the air. He's a pilot with a major airline and is still actively flying for the international carrier. Having traveled the globe in his career, Stephen has also experienced most of the events that shook the aviation industry. Most of them were short-lived, and the rebound by the industry was quite quick. But this pandemic, he says, is the mother of all crises. He joins us from sunny 17 degrees in Tokyo, where he is unfortunately quarantined in his room. Stephen, let's start with you. I mean, you've been traveling through this pandemic, right?
Yeah.
You've been on the move, flying. What changes have you noticed over this whole period, this 18 months or so that we've been enduring the pandemic?
I'll give you my
perspective from a crew, from an airline crew point of view. When it all started, yeah, it scared everybody. I was scared too. I was in this fear of what's all about, and actually nobody wanted to travel. So we were hunkered down for a long time, and when all the uh, processes and protocols are put in place to take care of all of it, I think people will start getting back. We have started getting back to resuming flying for the crew wanting to go back to fly. But I guess there's still this fear out there of catching the virus. But we adapt. Like I said, we are pretty resilient people. The industry is also resilient. We will start to adapt. All the crises in the world that's happened to the world, and most of them which affected the aviation industry, we adapted to the changes. I think the biggest threat that you can see to the aviation industry was 9/11, when it changed the whole security landscape of how people had to deal with security. So I guess in time to come, this will also be like go in the same manner. We have adapted to the bureaucratic protocols of wearing masks, doing tests almost every week or twice a week, which we go through, and the hassles of being quarantined. But to us, it's our mode of livelihood. And for the rest who love to travel, it's for your mental sanity, to go out there to be, I'll say, alive again. Yeah, I think things will come back, but we all ride through it, and it hasn't been an easy one. Yeah.
Did you have all these mental anxieties before leaving? Did you ask yourself many times over, should I bother to go through all this? Is it safe? Kush?
Oh yes, I can describe to you that it was completely unclear to me whether I could even fly, because there was very little information out there that was concrete, and it was really a leap of faith, in the sense that I knew basically that you could, but it was not clear to me. Even as I did my research online, there were several contradictory pieces of information. And one reason for that is that the situation is so dynamic that entry requirements, and it's all about entry requirements. Entry requirements change all the time. And you really need to be looking at the latest guidelines published by each country. So yes, there was great anxiety. Even as I checked in, I remember feeling anxious and wondering, am I going to be checked in? So yes, I certainly share that view.
I didn't really want to go at the time, but I figured it was kind of like, when am I going to get a window? So I went in July and August, and I returned in September. But the travel experience was crazy. There were people at check-in on the phone, not having the right tests, like people crying. It was crazy. So I think it's not only checking with the countries, but checking with what the airlines are requiring as well. So there's a lot of fine print. Everything's changing constantly. I wasn't sure when and if I could get back. So it was definitely a time to manage expectations and go with and plan, but also go with the flow.
And greater patience all around, right?
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
And Gerald, for you, I suppose you lucked the chance to go back and be with your family in Thailand, right? So,
Yeah.
Fewer obstacles in that regard, in terms of mental anxiety.
I think there's this kind of like willingness to travel thing that we are looking at, right? And I think it really depends on the reason for traveling. I think for me, my wife is Thai, my kid is Thai, and I haven't seen them for, I think, close to 1.5 years. So when I heard that I didn't have to quarantine for 14 days in Thailand, I jumped at it and was very willing to go through all the processes to really get there and finally meet my family. But that being said, the experience was a bit confusing and definitely created anxiety as well. I remember trying to find a right time during the weekends when the clinic is open for me to take my PCR test because I have to take it 72 hours before, but I needed 24 hours to get the results. So it was quite an interesting and exciting experience. I remember arriving at a Thailand airport and fumbling over all my documents because you had to print, I think, 10 different documents to be able to get in. And so it was an anxious experience going into the country for the first time. But obviously my driving intent and reason for going there actually overcome all these. But if you ask me if I would be willing to travel for a pure vacation, I'll probably wait and see.
Just like your research has shown, right? Most people are very concerned about all this uncertainty that's hanging in the air when it comes to travel.
Yes, definitely. I think that there's a difference between intent and also interest in traveling and actual traveling. And I think kind of like the willingness to travel and the interest to travel is really high. I think 51% of Singaporeans actually indicated they have been saving money for the past 2 years to actually spend more in the next vacation. And I think a lot of them has also mentioned that they will be willing to actually spend more than usual in their next vacation. So I do think that a surge is coming, but at the same time, we also ask them at this point of time whether they're willing to travel or not. And only 53% of people say they're willing to travel. So that's still pretty low considering that the next 2 months is the year end, right? But the numbers differ across age groups and gender. So younger people are more open to travel right now, while older people are not. Interestingly, males are more open to travel right now than females as well. I'm not exactly sure of the reason, but I think that really kind of informs the travel industry of the type of travel, right, that will come up first versus later on.
You know, all the things that you went through, which was the biggest pain point?
To travel to my country, right? I think it was, even though I only went through a 1-day quarantine, right? Because I think they changed the law so that you just need to take a PCR test to be able to enter the country fully. That 1 day was actually already something of a no joke situation for me. You know, I like to be outdoors. So I can't imagine going through 14 days of that. And I really admire people that can really go through that process.
And Amber, you did 14 days of that coming back, didn't you?
It was quite daunting at first, and then you sort of get in a groove, and thanks to friends who sent me all kinds of things to keep me occupied. But I had nightmares that I broke free from my room and I was running through the hallways of the hotel. It was quite an adventure.
Traveling in the age of the pandemic is certainly a different experience. It's an adventure. But I'd like to strike a slightly more positive note. I would like to say that what's important for everyone to know is that most countries are open to travel, contrary to what you think. In fact, it is not as onerous an undertaking as you might think. So this is therefore my experience. I expected pain, and it was sheer joy and pleasure.
Okay, so it's good that you set everything at a very low level,
Yeah.
right, in terms of what
Yes.
you're going to get through, and it turned
Yeah.
out fine.
Quite right.
So seems your mental state improved with travel.
The minute I was checked in, it was a done deal, you know. And you should have seen how different it was at check-in. The counter staff at SQ, who as usual, are as efficient as can be, had a piece of paper on which she had a checklist of everything that I had to produce to her to be checked in. And it was a piece of paper, surely because it was so complicated, she made notes to make sure that she had a checklist for each departure point that day. All I had to do was to produce a PCR certificate and inform her that I had filled in a health declaration form online, and that was all that was required for my travel to Maldives, she was surprised. So she kept looking at the paper and saying, "Is that it?" And that was it. And that was it. I was checked in. So, I realized that it's about doing your homework, as Gerald said, making sure you have your documents, making sure that you check what are the requirements on the day that you travel, because that may also change. And travel is entirely possible right now.
What was the flight like? I mean, was it full? Were there a lot of empty seats? What was the mood on the plane?
Can't say that there was any difference in the mood. It was as usual, as all travelers are, some excited, some wary. But the flights were relatively empty. I think my flight was about 30% full. That's all.
Amber, you had some challenges, right? I mean, you witnessed some issues on your flights.
Yeah, it sounds like you had a bit of a smoother trip, which is good to hear. But my getting back from the US was quite difficult. So first, my flight was delayed because of we're dealing with United here, so they're not as amazing as Singapore Airlines. I know it's my home country, but Singapore Airlines is next level. So United didn't have a crew, so the flight was late. Then once the flight did arrive, 4 people had to be removed from it for being unruly. 3 women apparently wouldn't turn their phones off, and the pilot went back to speak with them. And they obliged, but then they were rude to the flight attendant, so they were removed. And then they pulled the fire alarm as they, I guess, left the sky bridge. So the flight attendant was giving us, relaying all this information. She couldn't believe it. And then a separate man was removed for telling the flight attendant she was a waste of space. And so my flight was very delayed, which meant that I missed my connecting flight to Singapore. I had to stay at an airport hotel overnight. And even before that, the COVID test that I showed at the airport check-in was not relevant because it didn't say the letters PCR. It only said SARS-CoV. And so luckily I had a backup, but those results hadn't come in time. Which is why I got the original test. And so the backup test came and that worked. But there were people all at check-in confused and with many tests. And it was quite a mess, I have to say.
The luxury of travel is gone actually for the time being. It's no more luxurious to travel anymore. It's a pain in a way to travel at this point in time. So basically with that, anxious, anxiety is there, and that changes people's behaviors. So that's what the cabin crew of most airlines are all told to be aware of today with how they deal with passengers, But I'm very sure this will affect human behavior. Like they say, it takes about 100 days to change your behavior, right? If you keep doing it all the time. So I think our behaviors to this virus, how we wear masks, how we move around in a cabin, how we deal with people have all changed. Yeah. I think there's a big change in behavior. Just like the IATA report that I sent to you about, that people want biometric. Now they are willing to release their data when at one time they didn't want to. Yeah.
On the ground, when you reached your destinations, what was the behavior like?
I think most of the time it's really Thai hospitality, right? People are still really welcoming and polite and all those. It's just that everybody is dressed in the full gear. So it does feel like going into a hospital instead of entering into a new country, especially initially. It was pretty systematic in the process, right? So for Thailand, you had to get a QR code from Singapore through the embassy before actually traveling. So once you show the QR code, you go to the next stage. And then within like 15 to 20 minutes, you are kind of like already close to out of the airport. And then there are kind of like people from the hotels that will bring you to serve your quarantine. So all in all, pretty smooth in terms of the process. And I think that most of the time, people are erring on the side of caution and kind of like being careful about it, rather than just really fully opening up.
So on the streets, they are keeping their distance, or
It's interesting
this-
because on the streets, I see people wearing masks. But at the same time, I also see pubs where there were hundreds of people and they're all not wearing masks. So I think it's really striking a balance between kind of putting kind of broader measures for the general public, and also how to kind of like allow people to still have kind of work-life balance, right, and ability to go out, but applying the measures that's required to prevent the spread.
You're not allowed to go to Mali. So that's the difference. So during the pandemic, they've isolated Mali and have prevented tourists from going to Mali. And so you're confined to the atolls, the islands, if you like. And the density on the islands is very low. So on one atoll that I was at, there were 70 guests. And I never saw anyone except at breakfast time or at meal time. You know, so there was a natural social distancing. Everyone who was working at the resort wore masks, but guests were not obliged to wear masks. And so that worked for me. Because you hardly came into contact with anyone else, you really didn't have that problem of proximity or safe distancing.
Okay. And with your time in the Maldives, you interacted with various people. What did they feel about, the wearing of masks and the social distancing? Did they feel that it was necessary?
I think they were rather diligent, and as I said, guests were largely a maskless experience, for travelers. And but what you found was that it really felt as if business was as usual. It was 75% occupancy, and in one case, as I understood it, it was almost 80% occupancy. Which is high. It was almost business as usual.
Okay.
So that was my personal experience.
Well, that's good to know. I mean, it's good to know that people are still up and about and running things as they'd like to see it run, right?
I think so, from all over the world.
Okay. And Amber, how was it like for you?
In the US? Well, I think it really ran the spectrum from people being very careful and, early on in the pandemic, disinfecting their groceries to I think just sort of being fatigued and like worn out. But different places in the US reacted differently, I thought. So Pennsylvania was kind of in the middle. There were people wearing masks, some not, some vaccinated, some not, even members of my family. And I didn't, feel comfortable hanging out with unvaccinated people so much. But then California was I felt responsible. People were wearing masks indoors and outdoors. But Texas was a free-for-all. And the Delta had just gone wild there. And there were about 1,000 kids at my cousin's high school who had it. And testing was all booked and no one was wearing masks, and people were at big events and games. Even I rolled up to the drive-through testing center and people weren't even wearing their masks properly. I'm like, of all people, I think you should probably want to be protected the most.
I was in Perth recently, and we moved in a corridor, like from our airport to the hotel. If we stay at night, we quarantine and then we come back. So when I leave, I wait for my crew in the lobby, and you could see everybody out there is maskless. Everybody is enjoying themselves, having lunch, dinners at all the restaurants and bars and all that. Maskless. And here I'm fully vaccinated. All my crew is fully vaccinated, but we can't even go out. Nobody's allowed to go out, But a lot of things live in most cities are actually back to normal. But this is the protocol, the bureaucratic protocols that this requirements that is put in place. Like that's basically for us has been put by the Singapore government that prevents us from moving out. It's only when they lift the protocols then can we move out of the hotels or the quarantine outside. But the rest of the cities, they are all moving around, like Gerald says, or even Kus says, and Amber says, everywhere in the world, it's free moving now in a way. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, hopefully we'll get free movement again soon. There's a question here on, based on the survey results, I guess this is for you, Gerald. What's the advice and recommendation for the tourism travel sector? How should they market their messaging now?
Really interesting question, a question that we have been thinking about for a long time. And I think one of the key things is really nailing down the timing, right? I'm really seeing the initial wave of travel intent, but I think things will take still some time to change. I think the top two reasons in the survey that we ran when it comes to reasons why people are reluctant to travel now, number one is the fear of contracting the disease, which I think will improve over time, right? To a certain extent where people feel like it's more of an acceptable standard or acceptable level that they're willing to travel. The other one is inconveniences of traveling during COVID itself. And I think that has been discussed at length during this webinar. So things will also change. People will get used to it as well. And I think with the turn of the year next year, I think we will see people increase in terms of their willingness to travel to all these countries. But at the same time, I think what the travel industry should really understand is that travel is not going to be a binary thing where people just start to travel across every age group, across every generation, across every type of holiday or type of vacation. I think what we have seen in our results is that travel intent actually differs a lot across life stages, right? So young people, the Gen Z, the millennials, they're much more willing to travel even right now. While people with family holidays, these are things that people are still reluctant to do at this point of time. So I think what the travel industry needs to know is to take that to heart, right? Because travel will reopen in phases. And the phases will align very much to the type of travel and vacations as well. And if it's a case where younger people are willing to travel, then I think hotels as well as travel agencies and all those to take that into account in terms of the kind of marketing that they want to do, or they should do in terms of driving travel within where the demand is. But I think it's a matter of time where things will completely open up. And I think the people within or the stakeholders within the travel industry that moves the fastest, right, to adapt to these changes are the ones that will win the most, because I don't think that travel will go back to the previous days before COVID. It will most certainly change. It will come back. So the important thing is to understand the differences.
And I think these differences are, I don't know how long they're going to be around for, right? Because it's going to take some time for things to normalize. In the first place, you've got to sort out COVID. And if it keeps mutating, it's going to keep changing everything all the time. And you've got to keep adapting. So you've got to remain nimble, flexible. Are we able to do that, you think? Do we have that capability, or are we kind of too set in our ways in terms of how businesses run and how they react to things?
I think it's pretty heartening about how businesses has reacted to COVID. I think not only in terms of travel, but that I think will come eventually, but even in terms of work-life balance, in terms of things like how to build flexible working arrangements. So I don't think that it's going to be a challenge from the point of view that nothing can be done about this. I think there's a lot of things that can be done to really kind of make business travel and things like that more viable again. And I think we need to focus on that rather than saying that when can we reach back to the old status quo. And I think we need to answer the right questions when it comes to what are the opportunities for travel right now and how should we do it, right? Rather than just waiting for people to be fully confident to travel without the concern of COVID, because I don't think it will happen in the foreseeable future. I'm also pretty skeptical about whether it will happen ever, right? Because I think COVID-19 will always forever be embedded into how we view things and how we travel as well. So yeah.
I'm just wondering, technology has played a big sort of starring role in this COVID times, right? They've allowed us to still stay in touch. They've allowed us to communicate. So I think even for Amber, not seeing your family, you could still talk to them, you could still communicate with them, you could still, and for you as well, Gerald, with your family. But does that also mean that businesses realizing that, well, this works, why should we let people travel so much? Do you think businesses would have a different take on it now? Would they be approaching this, the next phase in a different way in terms of allowing people to fly so frequently?
For sure, for sure. I think definitely it will change that. And I think that a lot of instances where we had to travel previously, I think we are increasingly learning that we don't actually have to meet in person, right, to really get outcome for what we want to do. But I have polled our employees in Milieu multiple times in terms of, what kind of work arrangements they want going forward, even in a post-COVID world. And in the results always show that nobody wants a full work from home, nobody wants a full work from office, nobody wants anything that's binary. I think the outcome of it is people gradually realize that a very hybrid way of working is the way to go going forward. And I think that applies to travel as well. Where there are instances where you do want to travel there to meet people in person, and there are instances that you don't have to do that. And our company is a good testament to that because we grew from 17 people to right now we are 60 plus, all during COVID. So almost 50% of the people within the company, I've never met them in person, where I'll probably spend a lot of time with them if COVID didn't happen. It's all about building kind of then new avenues to really bond as a group. Make relationships instead of just really relying it for kind of making business decisions. And I think that's really, really important to kind of like tackle the idea of whether we do need to travel or whether travel will reduce for business because it might not be necessary now with the technology in play.
Would that be something that messaging would have to change? You think airlines would always be talking about efficiency, getting to the points of contact and speed of which you could do business. Would there be a shift, you think, towards more tourism related or leisure tourism related messaging?
I think leisure tourism will definitely always be there and be there to stay, change, but the demand will always be strong. I think business travel is where people really need to sink their teeth into how it will change, because I think it will change much more significantly than leisure travel, for sure. But I also think that there's always going to be new opportunities that comes with the changes, right? So I wouldn't see it as just a decline in business travel, right? I'll see it as how to create new ways based on why people need to travel for business these days. And I think there will always be business roles, business functions where travel is always required. So I definitely don't think it will die now. I think it will there be to stay, but it will just change drastically in terms of from when it was before COVID itself.
Okay. There's a question here for Amber regarding the use of masks. I mean, Suresh is saying that in Asia, wearing masks is quite common, it's accepted, but when you were in Texas, did you find that there were strange stares coming? Were you in a mask, by the way, when you were there?
Yes, so I wore masks indoors and not so much outdoors. If I was in a crowd, I tried to avoid crowded places. I was still quite careful. And I was worried if someone said something to me, how was I going to respond? And no one said anything to me. However, I did enter a shoe store and a woman had a shirt on that said, like, I'm a wolf, not a sheep, or something like that. And I took a hard right away from her because I felt like that was maybe someone who would say something. But no one said anything. I think it's sort of to each their own.
I would like to take this opportunity to address a misconception. The thinking out there, because of the propaganda about vaccination and the importance of vaccination, is that non-vaccinated or non-VTL travel is not possible. And this is completely incorrect. Non-VTL travel is possible. It's entirely possible. And in fact, there are so many countries that are open to non-VTL travel today. You just have to look for it. So I can give you one concrete example that would be Maldives. I would give you the example of Spain, Portugal, Mexico. In Mexico, you don't even need to take a test, or you don't even need to be quarantined. No test, no quarantine. Completely open to travel. So this misconception that has arisen because of policy needs to be addressed. VTL means you're vaccinated and you travel and you don't have to quarantine. But there are several places you can go to where you do not need to quarantine. You may need a test. So some places are test, no quarantine. Some places are test and quarantine. Some places are no test, no quarantine. So vaccinated, unvaccinated, it's possible.
Can you get into the airport if you're not vaccinated?
Oh yeah, I'm an example.
Okay, so you're not vaccinated and you traveled, no issues?
Absolutely none. But therein lied my anxiety, because there was no clarity on the subject. So I'd like to allay your viewers' fears that you can. And so that is exactly why I did it, actually. I wanted to test the system because I could not get straight answers from anybody. So the only way to get an answer to that was to put myself on the line, and I did so. And I can tell you that you can travel. There you go.
Excellent. No, it's good to know. Good. Yes, Stephen. Yes.
Yeah, I beg to his sense that, travel was restricted in the early part of COVID and all that. All those time is because borders were closed. Countries closed their borders. That's why I personally feel that travel was restricted. Airlines didn't want to fly, whatever it is. But once borders started to open, anybody could travel. The only problem was that you had to take tests and you have to go for quarantine if the country wants you to do that. It requires you to do that. If there's none of that, literally, I think you can just walk into the country, like pre-pandemic days, and the thing right now all over the world is every country has got a protocol. Okay, some requirements for you to do something. I have not filled up so many papers in all the stations that I've gone through, until now, like I just came in yesterday to Tokyo. There are 4 sets of papers. It's all about your health. Where have you been? What have you done? And we do this all over the world. And some even need apps for you to be downloaded so that they can track you. So all are these the country's requirements. It doesn't stop you from traveling. Yeah.
I just wanted to get from each of you one tip, perhaps, that you'd like to share with the viewers about travel. It could be a useful tip or a personal tip or whatever. Let's start with you, Amber. Do you have a tip for the
I have
for the
a
viewers?
tip. It's a product, and I have to say this thing saved my life. So it's this mask that, and not having traveled for nearly 18 months, people are annoying, and people talk on their phone really loudly without headphones, and this thing plays music, and so this saved me in many occasions.
One advice I would give to everyone is be prepared for change, and be prepared to be infected with COVID while you're traveling. And so if that is the case, buy COVID-related travel insurance. And that's available now. And so buy COVID-related travel insurance. And you have to be prepared to extend your stay if necessary. Because that has happened to a friend of mine who was traveling back from Switzerland to Singapore. And when he presented himself for the PCR test that Singapore requires, he found that he had COVID and he had to quarantine himself, for 21 days. So that's one downside. You have to be prepared for that risk. It's there.
If you really, really want to travel, if holidays and vacations will really help you with your mental health, given that mental health is a big issue these days as we kind of feel this cabin fever, just do it, right? But plan carefully. I think countries have been really building processes, so there's a process to it. You just got to learn it. But don't let it stop you from traveling if it really helps you to kind of drive balance in your life, especially towards the end of the year where I think we all deserve a rest.
I'll give you the 3 P's, okay? Prepare, okay? Plan, last for the 2 guys. And the last one I have is be patient, okay? I mean, yeah, you got to be patient because there'll be a lot of things that's going to be different. There are a lot of changes and there are a lot of requirements from everybody as you go along the way, from the check-in staff to the immigration guys to customs. Everybody will want something from you at this point in time, and they probably all be health related or something like that. So you got to be patient.
Great advice from everybody. Amber, Kush, Stephen, and Gerald, thank you for all the practical perspectives that you've provided at this session. I think it'll help those who are traveling. I'm sure there'll be a lot of other things coming up as we plan our trips and as more places open up for us to travel to. If we're going to be living in an endemic world, then just learn to live with it. And what will be, right? And meanwhile, carry on with life as you would like it to be for you, for yourself, and to meet up with people all around. Safe travels and bon voyage.